Hello everyone, welcome to my Kuni II Revenant Kingdom review video. This review will have spoilers, so if you're looking for a spoiler-free review, this is not it. I'll start with a short description of the game, followed by pros, neutrals, and cons as I see them. Then I'm gonna talk a little bit about the second DLC. I didn't play it, or rather, I played it, but it's not in the videos. But I'm gonna talk about it slightly. It won't affect the final score I give the game, just because, well, I didn't play it in the videos, so I don't think it would be fair. And then I'll give the game a final score. So without further ado, let's start with a short description of the game. In Kuni II, you start playing as the President of the United States. It's never explicitly stated, or at least I don't think it is, that he is the President of the United States, but I'm pretty sure his diplomatic car, or limousine, has little US flags at the front. Anyway, there's a missile strike. I think it's a nuclear missile. And yes, this is a game for children. Starts off with a nuclear strike. Very nice. Anyway, he seemingly dies and wakes up in Evan's world much younger than he was when he died. In Evan's world, there's, well, Evan. His father died, and he's about to go into a coronation ceremony because he's next in line to be king. The whole theme of the game is really about the responsibility of a leader, what it means to be a good leader, and just stuff like that. So, Evan is at his coronation, but there's something wrong. There's a coup going on. He's going to become the king of... what's the thing called? Ding Dong Dell. But the mice have overthrown the grimalkin. Grimalkin are catfolk. And he doesn't know it yet, but that's what's going on. So they attempt to kill him, but Roland, that's the POTUS, saves him and helps him escape. During the escape, one of Evan's teachers and basically a woman who raised him as if she were his mother dies, sacrificing her life to save him. And that's the beginning of the story. So Evan starts his own kingdom, much smaller one than Ding Dong Dell. And eventually he learns about leadership, responsibility, blah blah blah, you know the drill. And finally defeats the big bad who was gathering up all this energy, kinda, because every kingdom has a kingmaker, and the kingmaker is bound to the king. So by a king's bond, something like that. So the guy's going around stealing them to resurrect the Horned One, which is a monster that could destroy all life on Earth, or whatever their planet is called. Turns out the Horned One is actually his beloved. They fell in love. She was cursed. No, wait, she wasn't cursed, right? She tried to split the part of her that was her power from the part of her that was just her, so that she could live with the other guy, with Dalaran, sorry, because she loved him, but at the same time she could not be free of her duty as a kingmaker, and it was forbidden for a kingmaker and a king to, you know, be wed and stuff. And at the end, they defeat the Horned One. Alessandra, that's her name, is freed from inside the Horned One, and then she dies, and that's the end of the main story. So, without further ado, let's start with the pros. Naturally, because this is the it's not the second game, but you know it had a game before it. Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch. I'm going to start with some comparisons between that game and this game to see where this one improved. So the first thing that I really liked that Ni no Kuni II improved upon is the fact that combat actions no longer lock you out of all other actions. So if you'll recall in the previous game, if you took an action during combat, it would lock you out of all other actions, and the time that you were locked out was proportional to how powerful the action was. In this game, that is no longer the case. Next, weapon attacks are left to the player, not the AI. So in the previous game, when you used a melee attack, your character would just beeline for the target you picked and attack them randomly, more or less. In this one, you actually control your character and you can choose when to attack and how to move around and stuff like that. That's a major improvement, and honestly, I don't even know why they did that in the previous game. In Ni no Kuni 2, you have a dodging ability, which was not present in the previous game. In the previous game, basically, if there was a ranged attack, you just tanked it. Well, you could defend technically, but you still took damage if you did that. Here you can just dodge out of the way, which I think is pretty great, even if it does trivialize some encounters. Because theoretically you could just dodge indefinitely, because there's no cooldown or anything like that. So you could just walk up to the final boss if you could reach him, and dodge out of his attacks, and then just beat his ass at level 1. Ni no Kuni 2 no longer has familiars, instead we have higgledies. They somewhat replace familiars, but the key feature here, or the key point that I want to emphasize, is that higgledies do not share your HP with you. So they have an independent HP pool, kinda. It's reflected in how many higgledies you have, whereas in the previous game, familiars were basically just you shapeshifted into something else, so you only had a single health bar. Makes sense within the context of the previous game, but it was rather annoying as well. So here it's good that you have the higgledies without the shared HP aspect. Now, in the previous game, if you watched my Let's Plays, you know that I basically just used spells most of the time. Now, the issue there is that mana did not regenerate. There was no mana regeneration that I'm aware of. You basically just had to buy items, to eat them, consume them, drink them, whatever, and that would regen your HP. Here, that is not the case. Although the HP pool is much smaller, I think at highest you can have like 6 little hexagons of mana. Mana regenerates with every melee attack. So that's a definite improvement for me, because I love using magic and special abilities and stuff like that. And of course, speaking of items in Ni no Kuni 2 are more useful than in the previous game. First off, because, as I mentioned, using items doesn't block all other interactions, so that's always a good thing. You can actually use items while the game is paused, and I am pretty sure it's the only way to use them. So you hit the pause button, you have a list of items that you can use, so that is during combat. So during combat you hit the pause button, you have a list of items that you can use, and then you just use them and select the target of the usage. Now, items come in many varieties, but generally they just differ in 1 or 2 aspects. They either affect one character or all characters. And recovery items can either recover a small amount or fully restore whatever the stat is that they're associated with, so HP or MP. And then there are stat boosting items, which are just food items, so there's like a full course dinner or something that boosts your XP gain, and they last for a few minutes. I think the highest is like an hour. That's the massive XP boost one, which is very nice. While we're still on the subject of combat, I of course couldn't go without mentioning that the combat menu in Ni no Kuni 2 is much better than in the previous game. In the previous game you had to scroll through a bunch of the options during combat. Like, if you wanted to use a spell, you had to scroll all the way to the spells and then select the spell, select the target. And this while combat was going on. I think once you selected spells, the game actually paused the combat, but otherwise, scrolling was during combat, which was really annoying. Here, that is no longer the case. So abilities are selected with a simple 2-button combo. You hold R2 or the right trigger or whatever the hell it's called on the Switch, and then you press one of the 4 buttons. You know, the circle, cross, square, triangle, and whatever the other ones have. So, you know, very simple. And weapon swapping, I forgot to mention, you can have up to 3 weapons equipped. And you swap between them with a simple button tap. That's it. So, you know, no more scrolling, you can have multiple weapons, and abilities and spells and whatnot are a simple 2-button combo. Much, much better. Ni no Kuni II also features a much smoother, actually just smooth transition between roaming and combat inside dungeons. When you encounter an enemy, if you start attacking them, or they attack you, or just they notice you, a circle is drawn. You can't see it unless you approach it, but a circle is drawn. Within that circle, combat is going on. And if you attempt to leave the circle, an interaction starts where you're trying to escape combat, and if you succeed, then you escape. And that's it. There's no cutscene, no loading screen, you just go in, boom, combat. But again, only in dungeons. In the overworld, it's still a very small transition, very short, very smooth still, and then you enter combat. Now, something that I didn't quite like in the previous game was that Oliver could only learn, well, he could learn a bunch of spells, but he could really only use one weapon, the wand, which is not really a weapon, it's a stick. In this game, that is no longer the case. In Ni no Kuni II, Evan can learn every spell, every ability, and he can use every weapon that exists. So that is really quite nice, in my opinion. Now, I'm not quite sure if this next thing counts as an improvement, because it's a thing that just wasn't in the previous game, but I'm gonna archive it, if you will, here, regardless. Ni no Kuni II has this thing called the Tactic Tweaker. It lets you customize your resistance to elements or status effects, as well as the damage you deal to monsters, and some miscellaneous stats like movement speed, MP recovery, etc. Oh, and of course, drops and XP. XP gain, that is. So, you see here all these knobs and switches. You basically put points into this up to a certain maximum. You get points when you level up, if I'm not mistaken. And so you then customize this however you want. So if you're in an area that has a lot of squishy enemies, then you would want to increase your damage to squishy enemies. Or if you're in an area where enemies can confuse you, you'll want to increase resistance to confusion. Of course, tilt one way and you can't tilt the other. So if you increase resistance to confusion, you can't increase resistance to fire damage. I'm not sure if that actually decreases your resistance to fire damage, but the opportunity cost is still somewhat the same regardless. So yeah, this thing didn't exist in the previous game, it does here, and I think it's neat. Could be better though, and we'll discuss that in the cons. Now let's go to exploration. Now, one of the ways in which Ni no Kuni II improved upon exploration, which I actually referred to during gameplay in Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch, is that interactables to progress. So in the previous game we had like invisible bridges. In this one it's like 4-leaf clovers, or is it 3-leaf clovers, I don't know, that kind of spin, create a small tornado that you can jump up on. So those things are locked behind higgledies, as opposed to spells that you cast using mana. So that was a bit of an issue in the previous game, because you essentially had to make sure you had enough mana, or MP or whatever, to use the spell that would unlock the next section of the game. And there was a real chance that you would have to backtrack all the way to the previous settlement, just to rest, recover MP, and then try to make the trek again, or alternatively, bringing some MP recovering items, which of course would cost money. So that was a big deal for me in Ni no Kuni 2. Another thing, of course, faster walking speed. I mean, the settings are nice, but honestly, characters often walk way too slowly. Maybe it's just because I'm very tall and I walk fast. My fast walking speed is basically a light jog. At least, so I've been told. So I don't know, maybe that's it, but it always feels like characters walk very slowly. And of course, this is a bit of a cross between exploration and combat, but enemies' levels are visible, and quests have recommended levels, which in the previous game was not a thing. You took a quest, and if the level was too high, you had no way of knowing. You couldn't see the levels of the enemies either. So yeah, you were screwed if you engaged a high-level enemy by accident. Here, that is not the case. You can avoid combat with high-level enemies by actually knowing that they are high-level before you engage them. Very nice. Great improvement. Now, here's something that not everyone will agree is a good thing. I've seen people praising games for going the other way. But Ni no Kuni 2 is bigger in every respect. There are more quests, more characters, more companions, more story, more spells to learn, just more everything. You got crafting, you have some other things that I haven't even touched upon yet. And the game is just bigger. And I liked it. I liked it because it was bigger. It felt like a bigger world. And, more quests, more characters. That was very interesting. The companions have a bit of a caveat, which I'll touch upon when we get to the cons. So, as I mentioned, this game has more spells than the previous one. Those of you who don't know, I fucking love magic. It cannot be overstated how much I love magic in video games. If there's a magic class, I'm gonna play it. It's that simple. I don't care if it's the weakest class, that is the class I'm gonna play. And here there are many more spells of every element. So, fire spell, you got your basic fireball. I don't think I've ever seen a game with magic spells that didn't have a fireball. But you also have a fire tornado. I think you have a comet or something. Honestly, I can't recall. But you have just a bunch of spells, is the point. And it's really cool. Now, locations in Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch were already highly detailed. But in Ni no Kuni 2, they turned it up to 11 somehow, and made the locations even more detailed. So there's a lot of small details in each location, and just overall, the locations are much bigger, and so there are more things to see and explore, and that was really great. So now we get to the first pro that is not a comparison with Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch: Kingdom Management. Now, Ni no Kuni 2 has kingdom management. It's a big part of the game. You have, well, a kingdom, you have your castle, you have walls, you have a bunch of buildings that you can place. You have King's Guilders, that's the kingdom money. That's different from your own money, which is, I think, just guilders. And so with the kingdom, you research, you can also have stores in the kingdom, and buildings that collect materials automatically for you. Different kinds of materials depending on the building. And then you have citizens that you assign to these different buildings, depending on what you want to do, and of course depending on the citizens themselves. Now, to start with, the citizens are actual characters. They're not just faceless numbers that change but ultimately mean nothing, like in some other games with kingdom management. So here they are their own characters. That you can speak with them, you can find out what they like, what they dislike, what they've been doing, stuff like that. There are no consequences to the story in regards to any of this information, but I think it's always nice when characters in a kingdom management game aren't just faceless goons, and they're actually, you know, characters. Now, regarding citizens coming into your kingdom, the way they immigrate to your kingdom is very fluid. So as your kingdom grows, it attracts more citizens, and so they join every time you upgrade. Not every time, but as you upgrade, more and more people will join because they see, hey, this is a new kingdom, has new opportunities for me. Maybe I could go here and make something of myself that I couldn't where I am right now. Of course, not every citizen will come to your kingdom by themselves. Some citizens you will need to recruit personally, usually by fulfilling a request or just asking them. So you go up to them, or you speak to Swift Solutions, who can also scout citizens for you. And then they'll usually have a little quest for you, usually just a small delivery of some item, or giving them something, or just, you know, small things like that. And then they will join your kingdom. Now, as I mentioned, citizens are actual characters. I did say that their character didn't really matter much, but I forgot one thing. So some citizens have special abilities related to kingdom development, and they have different aptitudes for different roles. And some citizens have unique abilities that are based on their backstory. So it's not like the backstory has significance to the story. It's just that it meshes well with this mechanic of citizens' abilities in regards to kingdom development. Kingdoms have a different set of money called King's Guilders. This different money can be used to speed things up. I'm not quite sure why they decided to have a separate type of money. Maybe it was just to prevent people from buying too many things with the King's Guilders, because it does get insane. You can have millions in just a few hours. So, you know, maybe that was it. Now, I mentioned you can do research. Now, most research is to just unlock new things, new spells, new abilities, stuff like that. But it can also provide permanent bonuses to various things. So you gain more money or more experience and stuff like that. Now, I mentioned that some buildings automatically gather materials. These materials are largely used for crafting and research. So you don't have to go out and grind for these materials. They can be gathered automatically by your citizens. Now, buildings can be upgraded, as unlike some other games where upgrades just increase stats, here the buildings will actually change their appearance, and in pretty noticeable ways. I mean, the entire model is replaced essentially in most cases. It's really cool. Of course, that upgrading also provides the usual bonuses to production and stuff. Another big aspect of Ni no Kuni II is army battles. So army battles are battles where you lead an army and you fight against other armies. You can have up to 4 units. Each unit has its own leader, which grants it some special bonus of some kind, usually an ability. There are multiple types of units. That the 3 main types have a rock, paper, scissors thing going on. But there's also like shields, which are just highly resilient, of course. And 2 types of, or is it 3? I'm not sure if it's 2 or 3 types of ranged characters, but or maybe it's 4. Well, regardless, you have some ranged options as well. Combat requires army battles, requires some amount of strategy, because while we have some reinforcements you can summon, you have a limited number of them, and often you're going up against forces that are either more powerful than you or more numerous. So you have to balance things. You have to take over certain buildings to get more reinforcements, for example. And we have to take into account the rock, paper, scissors system that I mentioned. Finally, here's another pro, the last one. This one should have probably been under the improvements relative to Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch, but whatever. So in Ni no Kuni 2, the characters are much more relevant than in the previous game. They have their own personalities, they have their own quest lines, and you can interact with them regularly. So in Wrath of the White Witch, random citizens walking around were just that. You spoke with them once, they had their little voice line, and that was it. In Ni no Kuni 2, there are many more citizens, first of all, and second of all, the ones you can interact with often have some sort of quest, or even a quest line, that you can undertake, and it shows more about themselves, reveals some aspect of themselves, and also the main characters, of course. As for your companions specialize in different forms of combat. This is the same as in the previous game, but I think it's always nice to have characters that specialize in certain things, as long as the main character, of course, is a jack of all trades, because that allows for players to pick and choose what they want to do. So yeah, the companions specialize in different forms of combat, they have different weapons and abilities. Batu, for instance, specializes in hammers and other heavy weapons. Roland, of course, swords and ranged weapons, pistols specifically. And the others have some other combinations. Alright, now we get to the neutrals of Ni no Kuni II Revenant Kingdom. Now, the first neutral is that Ni no Kuni II is not a direct sequel to Wrath of the White Witch. This is mentioned in the actual main story, and it's explored a bit further in the DLC, the second one, Timeless Tome or something like that. Tale of the Timeless Tome, that's it. So, I mean, when I first played this, I expected a sequel, but the fact that it's not technically a direct sequel isn't necessarily bad, so that's why it's here in the neutrals portion. Unlike in Ni no Kuni 1, some plot twists are fairly foreseeable. So, at one point, Roland betrays Evan, but of course it's all fake just to go behind enemy lines. Another plot twist is that the main villain, Dalaran, is Roland's soulmate. I mean, Roland Crane, Dalaran the Arcane, come on. They're basically anagrams. They have like one extra letter in each name if you take out the. So Dalaran is just Roland with an extra O, and Arcane is just Crane with an extra A. So that was honestly just not a very good plot twist. I think maybe the people who translated their names, or localized I should say, their names, thought they were being clever, but honestly they're just giving it away, and it's just not that fun. Now, I mentioned army combat under the pros of this game, but there is a slight aspect of it that I'm not sure about. So the combat is more complex than it might seem at first, despite the rock paper scissors system, which is usually fairly simplistic. But it's not that much more complex, almost like it's just tacked on for the sake of tacking it on. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because if it became too complex, it could take away from the meat of the game. At the same time, I don't know, I feel like maybe they could have made it a bit more important. I don't know. So yeah, that's why this is here in the neutrals. Now, we get to the cons. Unfortunately, although Ni no Kuni 2 is one of my favorite games, it is not perfect, and I recognize that. And so now we get to the parts where the bits that I disliked. First, just like in the pros, because this is technically a sequel of sorts, I'm going to mention the ways in which this game is inferior to the previous one. So to start with, you no longer have a flying dragon. Instead, you have a dirigible. I mean, come on, dragon is probably the best way to fly. I mean, I'm not sure between unassisted human flight, a la Superman, or having a dragon. I'm not sure which one is better. But dragon is definitely better than any other vehicle, at least off the top of my head. In the Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch, the dragon really felt alive. It flapped its wings and it would sway from side to side. The wing flaps would occur when it dropped down a bit, so it was really cool. Here, you have the dirigible. It just flies in a straight line and lands where you need to, and that's it. It's functional, but it's just not the same as having your own flying dragon. Another aspect of the game that is inferior to the previous one is that there is no book like the Wizard's Companion. In the previous game you had the Wizard's Companion, which detailed just everything. It was an amazing work of art. In this one, there's nothing like it, and the book was one of my favorite things from the previous one, so it's a major downgrade going from Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch to Ni no Kuni II Revenant Kingdom. Now, although Higgledies are cuter than familiars, they're ugly cute, but cute nonetheless, they're not a good enough replacement for the familiars. I enjoyed having familiars, I enjoyed taking care of them and stuff like that, but Higgledies just aren't the same. So this is an aspect that I think is a bit of a downgrade. I know I mentioned the Higgledies in the pros, but that was just to mention that their HP is not the same as yours. They have their own HP bar of sorts. Now, as someone who loves magic, I of course need to mention that Morning Star, the awesome wand, was turned into a sword. And I just don't get the appeal of using boring, realistic, well, not realistic, but real melee weapons when you can have fantastical stuff in fantasy. It's like reading Harry Potter for, I don't know, the train rides or something, It just doesn't make sense to me. Or reading Lord of the Rings to learn about the trees that they had, instead of the awesome wizard fights and all the lore that goes behind it, that's in the Silmarillion and stuff like that. It just doesn't make sense to me. Now, although Ni no Kuni II has more enemies than I think it has more enemies than the previous game, most of them are just recolors. They're just different types. So you have green slime, you have black slime, for example. They're essentially the same enemy, just of a different type. And that's it. Recovery items no longer show the actual recovery amount. They use vague terms like a little, a lot, tons, or whatever. Feels like I'm back in Dead by Daylight. No, the only amount that you know for sure you will recover is when it says full. So in the previous game you actually had the exact amount in HP or MP. Here it's just some. You just kind of figure out from experimentation. And all, which of course means all, so that one you actually do know. Kingdom management in Ni no Kuni II is a big part of the game, but there is one aspect that I wasn't too fond of. Building placement is predetermined, so you can't place buildings wherever you want. You have specific areas for specific buildings that are drawn up in advance, that have already been determined. I mean, in-game I assume they say that the architects or whatever designed those in advance, and so you can't choose where to place them. Now, I praise the game for having more companions, more of everything really. But there is also a drawback. You have 6 characters rather, 5 companions plus Evan, but only 3 slots, just like in the previous game. So What the hell, game? Or developers, rather. You know, and they're all supposed to be traveling together. You know, they show up in cutscenes and whatnot, but then you can only have half of them in battle. Why? I mean, personally, I think it would be much cooler to have all of them simultaneously, but maybe that's just me. Now, the game is somewhat grindy. I think it also has to do with the fact that you can only have half your team out at any point. There is an XP share system in place, but it's not quite the same. I mean, you can still beat high-level enemies, it just takes longer. But overall, the game is a bit grindy. Of course, Kingdom development is not safe from the grind. Often you just wait for money to come in, or materials, because it's either that or you go out and grind for the materials yourself, which is worse, arguably. Oh, and I forgot to mention, but you need to take in the money and materials yourself. Because the materials will go up to, and the items will go up to a certain amount, and then everyone will stop gathering for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure where the money is supposed to go, but yeah, that's how it works. Finally, we get to something that has been bothering me for some time now. It's something that is ubiquitous in stories nowadays. The main villain is just misunderstood. And I say misunderstood, but air quotes. Because, yeah, sure, his beloved was taken away from him, his entire kingdom died, yada yada, but that's not a justification for wanting to genocide the entire goddamn planet. Those people had nothing to do with it. And, you know, I'm just sick and tired of all the villains nowadays having some sob story for why they turned to evil. Oh, woe is me. Go fuck yourself, man. You wanted to genocide an entire planet because your girlfriend got stuck in inside a monster, which turns out she was, actually, but I digress. Yeah, no. So, yeah, that's really, really annoying. In fact, all the villains, or the antagonists in the game are misunderstood, again, air quotes, in one form or another. It's never them. It's never them who is doing the evil things. It's always an outside force that compels them to do bad things. While we're on the subject of villains and antagonists, the main villain gets an entire goddamned kingdom at the end. He has done nothing to warrant forgiveness of any kind, and even if he had, he attempted to genocide a planet just to resurrect one person. And his punishment at the end is, okay, I lost my loved one for sure now. She's definitely dead. And then he goes, oh, well, time to start my own fucking kingdom. Hell, if that's a punishment, sign me up. I don't care. Give me a kingdom as punishment. Jesus. Oh, and, of course, fitting in with the theme, none of the villains suffer any consequences for their actions. Sure, you could argue, hey, they were being mind-controlled, manipulated, yada yada. But none of them... Oh no, wait, there is one guy. Vermine, I think. Yes, Vermine, I think, is the only one who actually suffers consequences. But he was also being manipulated, so it's like, okay, it's good for some, but not... punishment is good for some, but not others. Or for one, but not others. You know what I mean? Yeah, so that was really annoying. The guy tries to kill everybody, steals their souls to feed them to a giant monster, and it's like, hey, here, go start your own kingdom. Be a king somewhere else. Like, yeah, what a terrible punishment. Now, I didn't record myself playing the DLCs, but I did play them on my own time. in retrospect, I wish I had recorded because the story is great. I'll just summarize it in two very, very short points. It expands, the second DLC, Tale of the Timeless Tome, expands the story of the conductor, that is the humanoid rabbit man. And it turns out he is the first being that God, Zayn, and I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, ever made. And the story is about you rescuing God from corruption by something called the Great Mad Shadow, if I'm not mistaken. So it's basically all the evil from all the beings in all the universes that's essentially condensed inside Zayn. I'm just gonna call him God because, for all intents and purposes, he is God. That condensed inside God and manifested it as an evil creature that was attempting to harm and kill him. So the conductor naturally wanted to protect his creator and got Evan to help him out. This is probably the first Japanese game I've ever played where God is a character and is not the main villain. Like, it does feel like every time God, or godlike being or beings, is present in a Japanese game, like as an actual character you can interact with, he's usually up to no good, and you have to kill him at the end. I don't know, maybe I've just been playing the wrong Japanese games, but it was a breath of fresh air to have a game where your goal is not to kill God, but rather to help him out. It's still silly. I mean, the guy is the god of gods, but apparently needs the help of a random mortal. But it was interesting, nonetheless. And finally, we get to the final score, no pun intended. This was a really hard game for me to assign a final score to. On the one hand, in my notes, the pros are like a page and a half, and the cons are half a page, give or take. But at the same time, you know, the game is not a 10 out of 10 game, and some cons are really annoying. Like, for example, the fact that you don't have a flying dragon anymore, or a book like The Wizard's Companion, which again was one of my favorite aspects of the previous Ni no Kuni game. But in the end, I came up with a score that I feel is fair. So for Ni no Kuni II, Revenant Kingdom, I give a final score of 9 out of 10. If the game hadn't downgraded itself relative to the previous game, so with the Flying Dragon, the Wizard's the book, the Wizard's Companion, and the other stuff that I mentioned, maybe it would have been like 9.5 out of 10. And you know, the other aspects are minor, hence why they only count for 0.5. They only account for 0.5. So, you know, I think that 9 out of 10 is a perfectly fair score for this game, which is wonderful, it's beautiful, it's cute, it can be sad at times. There are some issues, like I mentioned, because of the villains never really suffering any consequences and stuff. But overall, the game is wonderful, and I recommend anyone who liked the previous game, or just someone who is looking for a nice little game to play. I say little, but it's dozens and dozens of hours. A nice little game to play, and doesn't mind that it's a bit more childish, to definitely play Ni no Kuni II Revenant Kingdom. And that was my Ni no Kuni II Revenant Kingdom review video. The next review video will be for Elden Ring, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Elden Ring. I don't know when it'll come out. That review is probably going to be a bit more controversial than this one. Not because of the score itself, but more that Elden Ring is better known than Ni no Kuni II. Although the score itself is definitely not going to make me any friends. Again, I don't know when it'll come out, but eventually it will. So look forward to that. As always, Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again next time.